Hello students, I'm Dr. Parminder Kaur, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Bhopal School of Social Sciences. Today, I will be discussing with you what are the features of an underdeveloped country or a developing nation. Before we do the features of an underdeveloped nation, we need to understand and distinguish between the words undeveloped and underdeveloped. Now, these two terms have been used interchangeably, but there is a difference between these two terms. For instance, countries such as Pakistan, Uganda, Colombia, India, we have the potential to develop, but we have not till now attained that potential. So we are underdeveloped nations, whereas undeveloped area would be such as Antarctic, Arctic and parts of Sahara, which have very limited potential or prospects of development. The World Bank uses the term developing countries and divides the countries of the world into low income, middle income and high income nations. Of late, a new term, third world country, is being used. Now let us just go through what is the UN classification of developing countries. The terms North, rich countries such as that of North America, Canada, Western Europe, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, these are all high income countries and they're also termed as triad, and all these countries are clubbed together. However, there are other countries outside the triad that they are jointly referred to as developing countries. Within the category of developing countries, there is also a distinction between the groups of countries. For instance, countries such as Central and Eastern Europe, Turkey, Central Asia and other countries are clubbed together, whereas countries such as Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, East Asia and Pacific are classified together as the third world of the South. So in addition to the North-South divide, we also have a divide of first world countries, second world countries and the third world countries. The World Bank classifies the countries on the basis of GDP. For instance, low income are those countries where the income GDP of that country is less than $1,036 and lower middle income is $1,036 to $4,045. Upper middle income is between $4,000 to $12,335 and high income is greater than $12,535 annual. Now, what is the limitations of using GDP as an indicator of development? Now, it does not take into account unpaid work. Now, there is a controversy going around, why should the contribution of housewives to the GDP not be included in national income accounting? That is not done because it is not monetized. That is why such services are beyond the purview of the national income accounting. Now, if the GDP is increasing and accompanied by the deterioration in the environment, so damage to the environment is not taken into account while calculation of GDP. And the unit of calculation that is based for the calculation of GDP is price. And it is the price of the commodity, not the amount of work. So we are just talking about the nominal aspect of GDP, not the real aspect of GDP. And if this increase in GDP is leading to division of societies into haves and have-nots and increase in the inequalities in the country, this GDP is not desirable. Despite these inadequacies, GDP is as an indicator of economic imbalances between North and South. GDP and other monetary figures, international literature, are expressed in US dollars, and this is the general norm. What are the different criteria on the basis of which we can classify countries as developed or underdeveloped? The first could be ratio of population to land area, that is population density. Now, this is also not a very appropriate criteria. The reason being, for instance, for countries like India and China, the land density, the land and population ratio is very high. And for countries such as Africa, the ratio is low, but both are underdeveloped nations. So this cannot be accepted as a criteria for underdevelopment. Now, the ratio of industrial output to total output. Now, this is indicative of the level of industrialization of the nation, and it is believed by the economists that greater the dependence of the population on agriculture and higher the contribution of agriculture to the GDP, lower is the level of development of that nation. But now if you take your own country, we have grown, the service sector has increased, but the percentage of population engaged in agriculture still remains above 40%. So can this rate of increase in GDP, not accompanied by increase in the employment generation and increase in the general upliftment of the society, so this is also not an appropriate criteria. The next is ratio of capital to per head of population. Now, a country can develop, have a high rate of GDP, but because of the fact that the population is also increasing at a very alarming rate, the capital per head might actually diminish. That is the reason this criteria is also rejected. Now, the existence of poverty, and poverty again is measured in terms of per capita income. So all those reasons why per capita income is not a good indicator of development also become the reason why this should not be selected as a criteria of measurement of underdevelopment. Now, low per capita income. Now, low per capita income is the most widely accepted criteria for identifying the level of development of a nation. But there are reasons why this per capita national income is also not a very appropriate criteria for measurement of the level of development of a nation. The reasons are, in most of the underdeveloped nations, there is an existence of a non-monetized sector. Non-monetized sector comprises of the activities which do not have monetary remuneration. For example, a farmer is producing for self-sustenance. He is only selling the surplus of the produce to the market. So the amount of the output that he consumes, it becomes very difficult to measure that, though an attempt is made to measure that in national income accounting, but it is difficult to measure that for the purpose of calculation of per capita income. And there is lack of occupational specialization. A farmer is just not a farmer. He is engaged in animal husbandry, poultry farming, might be the lady of the house might be stitching her own clothes for the family, cooking, a lot of other, there is not specialization. Everybody is kind of a self-sustainable viable unit, and people are mostly illiterate. Accounting becomes very difficult. One of the major drawbacks of calculation of national income and per capita income is both the parameters, the amount of output produced in money terms and the actual population. Both are difficult to calculate it in numbers, and these numbers are not very reliable because of varied reasons. And price levels, and if you try to make international comparisons on the basis of per capita income, the price levels vary across countries, and there is difference in wants and preferences of the people across country. So per capita income is also not a very good indicator of the measure of development of the country, but still it is widely accepted. Now let's get on to the next topic, that is, what are the characteristics of an underdeveloped country? How can we distinguish a developed nation from an underdeveloped or a developing nation? First is existence of general poverty. Now this poverty is chronic in nature. It is not because of a particular incident or downturn in the economic activity in the country. For instance, right now, because of the pandemic, a lot of countries are facing a decrease in the GDP growth rate, and leading to a lot of people falling below the poverty line. But quite possible it's just a temporary situation, and that might be elevated once the economy picks up. But in those countries where majority of the population is below the poverty line, abject poverty, here we're talking about absolute poverty. Relative poverty is a term when we try to compare the per capita income across nations and when categorized the way World Bank does. That is a measure of relative poverty. But in reality, we are also bothered about absolute poverty. Absolute poverty refers to those sections of society which have very low standard of living, and they are not able to even meet their basic needs, such as need for education, health, good food, nutrition. So general poverty is a very important feature of an underdeveloped nation. Now, second is agriculture. As I discussed before, a major section of the population is dependent upon agriculture. In India itself, when we got independence, more than 70% of the population was engaged in agriculture. Diminished gradually over the decades, still for more than 40% or more is directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. Now, the very distinguishing feature of a developing country is that of existence of a dualistic economy. Now, what kind of a dualism? Dualism means two kinds of systems coexisting at the same time. For instance, we have technological dualism, we have social dualism, we have financial dualism. Now, what does this mean? Technological dualism means two types of technological, there is a disparity in the level of technological development in the agricultural sector, industrial sector and service sector. If we look at India, in India, the service sector is very technologically advanced. Industrial sector has also caught up, but agriculture still remains to be a stagnant and backward agriculture, and obsolete methods of production are still being used. So this is known as technological dualism. Next is financial dualism. The financial institutions that exist in the economy, they're not just catering uniformly to all the sectors of the economy. There is a bias. Whenever there is a fear of NPA or a kind of money, the returns on the money that is invested are not so sure. For instance, in case of agriculture, this sector faces a lot of problem in getting any kind of financing from this financial sector. Given a choice, these financial sectors or financial institutions would only cater to the urban areas, to the service sector or the industrial sector, and agriculture will be completely ignored. But thankfully, the government ensures that a certain amount of funds do flow into the sector as well. Next is social dualism. Social dualism means we have two kinds of societies coexisting at the same time. One is advanced, trying to catch up with the world economy. The other is still caught up in backwardness, caught with their own set social norms and beliefs and rigidity, lack of mobility. So these are three kinds of dualism that exist in an underdeveloped country. Another distinguishing feature of a developing or underdeveloped nation is that of existence of underdeveloped natural resources. If you take the continent Africa, it's not that it does not have natural resources. It has, but the resources are unexplored, maybe because of the lack of resources, political will, or lack of technological advancement to explore these natural resources. If we take the state of Jharkhand, in spite of the fact that it is very rich in natural resources, it is still a very backward state. Next is the demographic features. Demographic features mean it refers to the rate of population growth. Now, this is a very contestable point, but generally we believe that a very high rate of economic population growth, in fact, hinders the rate of economic development, because high population growth rate leads to low level of development, and low level of development actually leads to low level of incomes. Low level of incomes lead to low level of savings, low level of investments, and as a result of which the rate of capital formation that happens in the country is tremendously reduced. So the per capita availability of capital and the amount of capital equipments that are available for the population are very low. Another very distinguishing feature of a developing nation is that of existence of unemployment and disguised unemployment. So there are three terms we need to clearly understand in this context. The three terms are unemployment, underemployment, and disguised unemployment. Unemployment means when able-bodied people willing to work at the existing wage rate do not get wages or do not get employment opportunities. That is referred to as unemployment. Underemployment means you're capable and you have the capabilities to earn a high level of income, but because of lack of employment opportunities, you choose to take up a job and you're getting underpaid. For instance, you're an engineer, but because of lack of employment opportunities, you do not have a job and income to match that of an engineer, and you start working as a technician. That means you're underemployed. Your contribution to the national GDP should have been higher, but in fact that is lower because there are no opportunities for you. Now, the third kind of unemployment, this is disguised unemployment, is the most challenging kind of unemployment, and that is prevalent in the agricultural sector. Now, disguised unemployment means the person is thinks that he is employed, he is contributing to the total output, but in fact he is not. His marginal productivity is actually zero, at times negative. That means he works or does not work. There is no contribution to the total output. Now this point can be clarified by having a look at this diagram. On x-axis we take the amount of labor used, and y-axis we have the output. Now if you look at the output curve, initially as you increase the labor force from OL1 to OL2, the output also increases from TS1 to TS2, and it is an upward sloping curve showing an increase in productivity. So up to OL2 level of labor, the output is also increasing and the marginal productivity is also increasing. That is, contribution of every additional unit of labor to the output is increasing. But beyond that, look at the section L2, L3. When you increase the amount of labor used from OL2 to OL3, the output remains constant, and that is depicted by the S2, S3 portion of the output curve. This means this amount of labor L2, L3 is not contributing significantly to the total output. So they are working or not working does not make a difference. So this basic three different kinds of unemployment that exists are also a very important feature of a developing nations. Another very important feature of a developing nation or an underdeveloped nation is that of foreign trade orientation. That means the dependence on foreign trade. A developing nation is majorly an exporter of primary products, and these primary exports of these primary goods are very vulnerable to international fluctuations in the prices that exist. And they actually the earnings from our exports are very less as compared to the imports, which are generally imports comprise of finished goods and manufactured goods. So it leads to unfavorable income terms of trade. So a developing nation necessarily does not benefit from international trade. It increases its dependence on other countries for its survival. So students, these are the important points on the basis of which classification of developing and developed nations can be made. Hope you understood the topic. Thank you.